The invoice arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, slipped under my door like some kind of anonymous threat. And when I picked it up and saw the number at the bottom, I nearly choked on my coffee. $3,200 for snow removal services rendered to my property over the winter months, billed by one Patricia Hendricks, HOA board president of Meadowbrook Estates in Boulder, Colorado. The problem: I had never requested snow removal services, never signed a contract, and most importantly, I had been handling my own driveway all winter with the snowblower I bought specifically for that purpose. I stood there in my entryway, still holding my coffee mug in one hand and this ridiculous invoice in the other, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. My name, Nathan Vance, was printed clearly at the top. My address, 847 Pinecrest Drive, was correct. But the services listed were completely foreign to me. According to this itemized bill, someone had plowed my driveway 17 times between December and February, cleared my walkways, salted my steps, and even removed snow from my roof twice. I looked out my front window at my driveway, which I had personally cleared after every single snowfall this winter, often at 6 in the morning before work, freezing my hands off in the process. This had to be some kind of mistake, or worse, a scam. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number printed at the bottom of the invoice. It rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered, sharp and businesslike. "Patricia Hendricks, HOA board president. How can I help you?" "Hi, yes, this is Nathan Vance from 847 Pinecrest Drive. I just received an invoice for snow removal services, and there's been a significant error. I never hired anyone to plow my driveway." There was a pause, and I could hear papers shuffling on the other end. "Mr. Vance, our records are quite clear. Your property received professional snow removal services throughout the winter season. The work was documented each time with photographs and timestamps." "That's impossible. I've been clearing my own driveway all winter. I haven't seen a single plow truck near my house except for the city doing the street." Her tone shifted, becoming more condescending. "Mr. Vance, I have photographs. Perhaps you're simply not remembering correctly, or maybe you weren't home when the services were provided. Regardless, the work was done, and payment is due within 30 days. I'm telling you, nobody plowed my driveway. This is either fraud or you've got the wrong address. The address on file is 847 Pinecrest Drive. Is that not your residence?" "It is, but nobody plowed my property." "Mr. Vance, I'm not going to argue with you about documented services. If you refuse to pay, the HOA will place a lien on your property. I suggest you review your finances and submit payment promptly. Good day." She hung up before I could respond. I stared at my phone, incredulous. This woman had just threatened to put a lien on my house for services I never received. I had bought this house 3 years ago specifically because it was outside the main HOA boundaries, or so I thought. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA governed the houses on the north side of the development, while mine was on the south edge, technically part of the neighborhood but exempt from most HOA rules and fees. At least, that's what my real estate agent had assured me when I signed the papers. I pulled out my laptop and started going through my closing documents, searching for anything related to the HOA. After 20 minutes of reading through dense legal language, I found it. A clause stating that while my property was not subject to standard HOA fees or architectural review, I could be billed for community services utilized if I chose to opt into certain programs. But I had never opted into anything. I had never even spoken to Patricia Hendricks before today. My phone rang, and I saw it was my tenant, Marcus, calling from the rental property I owned on the other side of the neighborhood. I had bought it as an investment 2 years ago, a small 3-bedroom house at 1243 Birchwood Lane that I rented out to help cover my mortgage. Hey Marcus, what's up? Hey Nathan, quick question. Did you hire a snow removal company this winter? Because someone's been plowing the driveway here all season and I just wanted to make sure you knew about it. My stomach dropped. What? Someone's been plowing the rental? Yeah, like clockwork. Every time it snows more than a couple inches, there's a truck here within a few hours. I figured you had arranged it as part of the rental agreement, even though it wasn't in the lease. I wasn't complaining since it saved me the work, but my buddy mentioned I should probably confirm with you for tax purposes or whatever. I felt my face getting hot. Marcus, I never hired anyone. How many times has this happened? I don't know, man. 15, 20 times maybe, all winter. They do a really thorough job too. Driveway, walkway, even the front steps. They salted everything. And you never talked to them, never got a name or a company. No, they usually came when I was at work. A few times I saw the truck leaving, but I never flagged them down. It's a white truck with some kind of blue logo on the side. I figured you had it handled. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Okay, thanks for letting me know. If they show up again, can you get their information? Sure thing. Is everything okay? Yeah, just a billing mix-up I need to sort out. Thanks, Marcus. I hung up and looked at the invoice again. 17 plowing services. Marcus said someone had plowed the rental 15 to 20 times. The numbers matched. Patricia Hendricks had been billing me for plowing my rental property while thinking it was my primary residence. But that made no sense. How could she confuse the two addresses? They weren't even on the same street. I pulled up the county property records online and searched for both addresses. My primary residence at 847 Pinecrest Drive was listed under my name, purchased 3 years ago. The rental at 1243 Birchwood Lane was also under my name, purchased 2 years ago. Both were in the Meadowbrook area, but only the rental was actually within the HOA boundaries. I had specifically checked that when I bought it because I knew there would be HOA fees, which I budgeted for in the rental income calculations. Then it hit me. Patricia Hendricks had my name associated with 2 properties. She had looked up my primary address for billing purposes, but had actually been servicing the rental property. She had no idea she was plowing a property that I was legally obligated to maintain through HOA fees, and she was trying to charge me extra for it at my non-HOA property. This was going to be interesting. I called her back. This time she answered on the first ring. Mr. Vance, I already told you that the matter is not up for debate. I have a question for you, Patricia. What address did your crew actually plow? I'm not playing games with you. Your address is clearly listed. Humor me. What address did they physically go to and clear snow from? She sighed dramatically. According to the work orders, the property serviced was 1243 Birchwood Lane. We have your name on file, so obviously that's your residence and that's where the bill goes, to your mailing address at 847 Pinecrest. Right. Here's the thing, Patricia. 1243 Birchwood Lane is my rental property. It's within the HOA boundaries and I pay monthly HOA fees for it. Snow removal is included in those fees, which I've been paying faithfully for 2 years. You plowed a property I already pay you to maintain, and now you're trying to charge me again for services already covered. There was a long silence. I could practically hear her mind working through this information. That can't be right. Our records show that 1243 Birchwood Lane has not been enrolled in HOA services. Then your records are wrong. I can send you proof of payment. Every month like clockwork. Check your own accounting. Hold on. The line went quiet except for the sound of typing, After about 2 minutes, she came back and her voice had changed. It was tighter, more defensive. "I see the payments now. There appears to have been an administrative error. However, the snow removal services provided this winter were above and beyond the standard HOA package. They were premium services. Premium services that I never requested and that nobody informed me about. Marcus, my tenant, never signed anything. I never signed anything. You just decided to do extra work and now want to bill me for it. The services were performed in good faith." "In good faith? You called my house earlier today and threatened to put a lien on my property for services I never authorized. That's not good faith, Patricia. That's intimidation." Her voice went cold. "Mr. Vance, I suggest you watch your tone. The HOA board has considerable authority in this community, and we don't take kindly to residents who try to shirk their financial obligations." "I'm not shirking anything. I'm refusing to pay for services I didn't request, didn't authorize, and that are already covered by the HOA fees I pay every single month. If you want payment for extra services, you need a signed contract, which you don't have. We'll see about that. This isn't over, Mr. Vance." She hung up again. I sat down on my couch, feeling the adrenaline coursing through me. Patricia Hendricks had just made this personal, and I had a feeling this was going to escalate before it got resolved. I spent the rest of the evening documenting everything. I pulled up my bank statements showing every HOA payment for the rental property. I found the original HOA agreement from when I purchased 1243 Birchwood Lane, which clearly listed snow removal as an included service. I took screenshots of the property records showing I owned both addresses. I even called Marcus back and asked him to write a statement confirming he had never authorized or requested snow removal services. The next morning, I drafted a formal response to Patricia's invoice, laying out all the facts. I explained that the property she had serviced was already covered by HOA fees, that no contract existed for additional services, and that I would not be paying the invoice. I sent it via certified mail so I would have proof of delivery. For a few days, things were quiet. I started to think maybe Patricia had realized her mistake and was going to drop it. I should have known better. The following Monday, I came home from work to find a notice taped to my front door at 847 Pinecrest Drive. It was an official HOA violation notice, stating that my property was in violation of community standards due to excessive snow accumulation during winter months, and that I was being fined $500. The date on the notice was backdated to January, claiming the violation had occurred months ago, but was only now being formally processed. This was retaliation, pure and simple. Patricia was trying to punish me for refusing to pay her fraudulent invoice. The absurdity of it was almost funny. She was fining me for not having my snow cleared while simultaneously trying to bill me for clearing snow at a different property. But I wasn't laughing. This woman was abusing her position, and she needed to be stopped. I took photos of the notice and immediately drafted another letter, this time pointing out that my property at 847 Pinecrest Drive was not subject to HOA regulations regarding property maintenance, as per the exemption clause in my deed. I also noted that the timing of this violation notice, coming immediately after my refusal to pay an illegitimate invoice, constituted clear retaliation and harassment. I sent this letter to the entire HOA board, not just Patricia. I looked up the names and addresses of the other board members on the community website and mailed copies to all 5 of them. If Patricia was going to play dirty, I was going to make sure everyone knew about it. 2 days later, I got a call from a man named Robert Chen, who identified himself as the HOA vice president. Mr. Vance, I received your letter about the snow removal invoice and the violation notice. I want you to know that I had no knowledge of either of these actions before receiving your correspondence. I appreciate you calling, Robert. This whole situation has been incredibly frustrating. I can imagine. I've been reviewing the documentation you provided, and I have to say, I'm concerned about several things. First, you're correct that your primary residence is not subject to standard HOA regulations. That violation notice should never have been issued. Second, the snow removal invoice appears to be for services rendered to your rental property, which is already covered under existing HOA fees. Exactly. I've been trying to explain this to Patricia, but she won't listen. I'm going to be frank with you, Mr. Vance. This isn't the first time Patricia has acted unilaterally without board approval. There have been other incidents, but nothing quite this egregious. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for this Thursday evening. Would you be willing to attend and present your case? Absolutely. What time? 7 p.m. at the community center. I'll send you a formal invitation via email. Thank you, Robert. I really appreciate you looking into this. It's my responsibility. The HOA is supposed to serve the community, not harass homeowners. Thursday evening arrived, and I showed up at the Meadowbrook Community Center with a folder full of documentation. The community center was a modest building at the edge of the neighborhood, with a large meeting room that held about 50 people. When I walked in, there were already a dozen residents seated in the audience chairs, and the 5 board members were seated at a long table at the front of the room. Patricia Hendricks sat in the center chair, and the moment I entered, her eyes locked onto me with barely concealed hostility. She was exactly what I had expected. A woman in her mid-50s with short blonde hair styled in that aggressive Karen bob, wearing a burgundy blazer that looked like it cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and she was gripping a pen like she wanted to stab something with it. Robert Chen sat to her right, a calm-looking man in his 40s with glasses and a gentle demeanor. The other 3 board members looked uncomfortable, like they didn't want to be there. Robert called the meeting to order and explained that they were gathered to address a dispute regarding snow removal services. He invited me to present my case first. I stood up and walked to the front, laying out my documentation on a small podium. I explained the entire situation clearly and methodically. I showed my bank statements proving I had been paying HOA fees for the rental property. I presented the HOA agreement listing snow removal as an included service. I showed the property records proving I owned both addresses and that only the rental was within HOA jurisdiction. I even had Marcus's written statement confirming he never authorized the services. The bottom line, I concluded, is that Mrs. Hendricks billed me $3,200 for services that were already covered by fees I had been paying. When I refused to pay this illegitimate invoice, she retaliated by issuing a backdated violation notice against my primary residence, which isn't even subject to HOA regulations. This is harassment and it needs to stop. The room was silent. Several of the residents in the audience were nodding. One woman in the back was writing notes furiously. Patricia stood up, her face flushed. This is ridiculous. Mr. Vance is trying to avoid paying for services he received. Our snow removal contractor did exceptional work on his property all winter, going above and beyond the standard package. What standard package? I interrupted. Marcus never asked for anything beyond basic snow removal, which was already included. Your contractor showed up and did the work without authorization. The work was necessary and proper. Your tenant clearly benefited from it. That's not the point. You can't just do work without authorization and then demand payment. That's not how contracts work. Robert held up his hand. Patricia, did you have a signed contract or work order from Mr. Vance or his tenant authorizing these services? She hesitated. The contract was implicit based on the services rendered. That's not a real thing, I said. You can't create an implicit contract by just doing work someone never asked for. One of the other board members, a woman named Susan, spoke up. Patricia, why was Mr. Vance billed at his primary residence if the work was done at the rental property? His primary residence is his mailing address on file. But the rental property has separate HOA accounts and fees. Why wasn't this billed through the existing HOA account for that property? Patricia didn't have a good answer for that. She stammered something about administrative efficiency, but it was clear she was losing ground. Robert pulled out a calculator and started running numbers. Patricia, I'm looking at the invoice amount. $3,200 for 17 plowing services comes out to about $188 per service. Our standard contract with the snow removal company is $75 per residential property. Why is Mr. Vance being charged more than double our contract rate? The room went completely silent. This was new information to me. I had assumed the price was high, but I didn't know it was more than double the going rate. Patricia's face went from flushed to pale. The contractor charged premium rates for that particular property because of its location and driveway configuration. I've been to that property, Robert said. It's a standard driveway, nothing complicated. This doesn't make sense. He turned to the other board members. Did any of you approve premium pricing for snow removal services? They all shook their heads. Susan looked particularly angry. Patricia, are you saying you authorized premium pricing without board approval? I have the authority to make operational decisions. Not financial decisions of this magnitude, Robert said firmly. Any expenditure over $500 requires board approval per our bylaws. That's been our policy for 10 years. I watched this unfold with growing fascination. What had started as Patricia trying to scam me out of $3,000 was turning into something much bigger. The other board members were clearly upset, and I could see them connecting dots I hadn't even considered. Robert turned to me. Mr. Vance, do you have the name of the snow removal contractor? My tenant said it was a white truck with a blue logo. I didn't get the company name. Patricia stood up abruptly. This is my company. I own a snow removal business, and I contracted my own services to handle properties in the community. The room erupted. Several residents started talking at once. Susan actually gasped. Robert's expression went from concern to furious. You've been using your position as HOA president to funnel business to your own company. Robert's voice was sharp. Patricia, that's a conflict of interest. That's potentially illegal. I disclosed my business ownership in my board application. Disclosing that you own a business is different from awarding yourself contracts without board approval and without competitive bidding. How long has this been going on? Patricia grabbed her papers and shoved them into her briefcase. I don't have to sit here and be attacked. I've done nothing wrong. I've provided excellent service to this community for 3 years. Sit down, Susan said, her voice cold. We're not done here. But Patricia was already heading for the door. I resigned from the board effective immediately. You people are ungrateful and hostile. Figure out your own snow removal. She stormed out, leaving stunned silence in her wake. Robert rubbed his face. Okay, this just became a much larger problem. Susan, can you pull all the financial records related to snow removal contracts for the past 3 years? I think we need to do a complete audit, Susan nodded. I'll get on it tomorrow. Robert turned to me. Mr. Vance, on behalf of the board, I apologize. The invoice you received is void and the violation notice is rescinded. Patricia had no authority to issue either one. If you've suffered any damages or expenses because of this, please document them and submit a claim to the board. Thank you. I appreciate you taking this seriously. I'm just sorry it got this far. We should have been paying closer attention to what Patricia was doing. I left the meeting feeling vindicated but also unsettled. Patricia's sudden resignation suggested she knew there was more to find, and I had a feeling the story wasn't over yet. Over the next week, Susan and Robert conducted their audit, and what they found was staggering. Patricia had been awarding snow removal contracts to her own company for 3 years without competitive bidding and without board approval. She had been charging rates that were 30 to 50% higher than market value. In total, she had funneled approximately $65,000 to her business from HOA funds, money that should have been used for community improvements or kept in reserve. But it got worse. Several homeowners came forward after hearing about my case, reporting that they had also received unexpected invoices for services they never authorized. Patricia had apparently been running a side operation where she would do extra work on properties without permission and then bill the homeowners directly, bypassing the HOA accounting entirely. In some cases, she had threatened liens or violation notices when people refused to pay, just like she had done to me. Robert called another meeting, this time to inform the community about the full extent of Patricia's misconduct. The room was packed. Easily 40 residents showed up, many of them angry and demanding answers. "We've completed our preliminary audit," Robert announced, "and the findings are deeply troubling. Patricia Hendricks abused her position as board president to enrich herself and her business at the expense of the community. We are referring this matter to legal counsel to determine what criminal charges may be appropriate. We are also exploring civil remedies to recover the misappropriated funds." "What about the people she threatened?" someone called out from the audience. I recognized her as the woman who had been taking notes at the previous meeting. "If anyone has documentation of threats or intimidation from Patricia, please provide that to us. Those actions may constitute additional offenses." I raised my hand. "I have recordings of our phone conversations." Colorado is a one-party consent state for recording, so they're legal. Robert's eyebrows went up. "You recorded your conversations with her?" "After the first call, yes. I had a feeling this was going to be a problem, so I started recording every interaction. I have her threatening to put a lien on my property, and I have her admitting that she billed me for services to my rental property while knowing I already paid HOA fees." "Can you provide copies to the board?" "Absolutely." Susan spoke up. "Mr. Vance, would you be willing to speak with our attorney? Your case is probably the most well-documented, and it might serve as the foundation for legal action." "Happy to help." The board hired a law firm that specialized in HOA disputes and fraud cases. I met with their lead attorney, a sharp woman named Michelle Torres, who reviewed all my documentation and listened to the recordings. She was particularly interested in Patricia's admission that she owned the snow removal company and had been billing me directly. "This is textbook self-dealing," Michelle explained. She used her position to benefit her private business without proper authorization or disclosure. In Colorado, HOA board members have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the community, not themselves. She violated that duty repeatedly. "What kind of charges are we looking at?" "Potentially theft, fraud, and abuse of position. The district attorney will make the final determination, but based on what I'm seeing, there's definitely enough for a criminal referral. How long does this take? Depends on the DA's office and their caseload. Could be weeks, could be months, but the evidence is solid. She's going to have a hard time defending this. Michelle filed a formal complaint with the Boulder County District Attorney's Office, providing all the documentation and evidence the board had gathered. She also filed a civil lawsuit on behalf of the HOA, seeking to recover the $65,000 plus additional damages. I thought my part in this was mostly done. I had provided my evidence, the board was taking action, and I could get back to my normal life. But Patricia wasn't done with me yet. 2 weeks after the second board meeting, I came home to find my mailbox had been vandalized. Someone had taken a baseball bat or something similar and smashed it completely. The metal was dented and twisted, and my mail was scattered across the lawn. I gathered up the envelopes, checked for anything important, and then took photos of the damage. The next day, I found a dead bird on my doorstep. It hadn't been there naturally. It was positioned deliberately, clearly placed there by someone. I felt my skin crawl. This was escalating from administrative harassment to actual threats. I called the Boulder Police Department and filed a report. The officer who responded was a young guy named Officer Daniels who took the situation seriously when I explained the background. You think this Patricia Hendricks is responsible? I don't have proof, but the timing is pretty suspicious. She knows where I live. She's already demonstrated a willingness to retaliate, and now she's facing criminal charges. Has she contacted you directly since resigning from the board? No, but that almost makes it worse. If she's willing to do this kind of thing without even trying to talk first, I'm worried about what comes next. Officer Daniels took photos and wrote up a report. I'll file this as criminal mischief and possible intimidation. Keep documenting anything else that happens, and call us immediately if you see her near your property or if anything else occurs. Will you contact her? We'll do a welfare check and ask her some questions. Can't promise more than that without stronger evidence. I installed security cameras that afternoon. Front door, back door, driveway, and one covering the mailbox. They were Wi-Fi enabled and would send alerts to my phone if they detected motion. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for the next incident. 3 days later, at 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I grabbed it and pulled up the camera app, expecting to see a raccoon or a stray cat. Instead, I saw a person in dark clothing approaching my front door. I immediately called 911 while keeping my eyes on the camera feed. The person was carrying something, holding it close to their body. They got within 10 feet of my door and then stopped, seemingly noticing the camera. They looked up directly at it for a moment, and even though they were wearing a hood, I could see enough of the face to know it was Patricia. She turned and ran back to a car parked on the street, a dark sedan that I didn't recognize. She got in and drove off quickly. The whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it was all captured on camera. The 911 dispatcher kept me on the line until police arrived. Officer Daniels was one of the responding officers, along with his partner, Officer Martinez. "Let me see the footage," Daniels said. I pulled it up on my laptop and showed them the entire sequence. The video quality was good enough to clearly identify Patricia's face during that moment when she looked up at the camera. "What was she carrying?" Martinez asked. I couldn't tell. "Something in her hands, but she never got close enough to leave it." "Probably got spooked by the camera," Daniels said. "This is enough for an arrest warrant, though. Clear trespassing with apparent intent to commit vandalism or intimidation. Combined with the previous incidents, the DA is going to want to move on this." They took copies of the video and left. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, too wired and unsettled by the idea that Patricia had been standing outside my door in the middle of the night. The next morning, Robert Chen called me. "Nathan, I heard about the incident last night. Are you okay?" "Yeah, just shaken up. Your former board president is apparently escalating. I'm so sorry you're dealing with this. The board wants to hire security for the neighborhood until this is resolved. We'll have someone patrolling overnight." "I appreciate that. Has your attorney made any progress on the civil case?" "We've served Patricia with the lawsuit, and she's retained counsel. Her lawyer sent us a letter claiming everything was above board and threatening a countersuit for defamation. It's standard defensive posturing, but Michelle says we have a strong case." "What about the criminal investigation?" "The DA's office has assigned a prosecutor. They're building a case for theft and fraud. Your video from last night will probably add stalking or harassment charges." Patricia was arrested the following Tuesday. According to Robert, who heard it from one of the neighbors, the police showed up at her house at 7 in the morning with a warrant. She was processed and released on bond a few hours later, with conditions that included staying away from me and my properties. The criminal case moved forward slowly, as these things do. The district attorney's office charged Patricia with theft, fraud, abuse of position, criminal mischief, and harassment. Her attorney tried to get the charges reduced or dismissed, arguing that the snow removal billing was a simple business dispute and that the overnight visit to my house was a misunderstanding. But the evidence was too strong. The recordings, the documentation, the video footage, and the testimony from multiple homeowners painted a clear picture of a pattern of misconduct. The civil case was more complex. Patricia's attorney argued that she had provided legitimate services and that any pricing disputes should be handled as contract issues, not fraud. Michelle countered that Patricia had violated her fiduciary duty, engaged in self-dealing, and systematically defrauded the HOA. The case would likely take a year or more to resolve fully. Meanwhile, life in Meadowbrook Estates was changing. The board hired a new president, a retired accountant named David Richardson, who immediately implemented new financial controls and oversight procedures. They put out a request for bids for snow removal services for the next winter and selected a company that charged reasonable rates and had no connection to any board member. They also established a formal complaint process so homeowners could report concerns without fear of retaliation. I testified at Patricia's criminal trial, 8 months after the initial invoice showed up under my door. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, and Patricia sat at the defense table looking diminished somehow, less intimidating than she had seemed during our phone calls and at that first board meeting. Her attorney tried to paint her as a small business owner who had made some administrative mistakes, but the prosecution methodically presented the evidence of systematic fraud. My testimony took about an hour. I walked through the timeline of events, from receiving the fraudulent invoice to the phone calls, the retaliation, and finally the nighttime visit captured on camera. Patricia's attorney tried to poke holes in my story during cross-examination, suggesting I had misunderstood the billing or that I was exaggerating the threat I felt. But I had documentation for everything, and the attorney couldn't shake my account. Other homeowners testified too. A retired couple described how Patricia had billed them $2,000 for landscaping work they never authorized. A single mother talked about how Patricia had threatened to fine her into foreclosure over a minor fence violation. The prosecution built a comprehensive picture of abuse and fraud that went far beyond my individual case. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for about 5 hours before returning with a verdict, guilty on all counts. At sentencing 2 months later, the judge was harsh. She noted that Patricia had held a position of trust within the community and had systematically violated that trust for personal gain. She sentenced Patricia to 4 years in prison, though with the possibility of parole after 18 months. She also ordered restitution of $65,000 to the HOA plus additional amounts to individual homeowners who had been defrauded, including $3,200 to me. I attended the sentencing hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom. When the judge read the sentence, Patricia's shoulders sagged. She had clearly been hoping for probation or a suspended sentence. Her attorney asked if she could remain free pending appeal, but the judge denied the request. Patricia was taken into custody immediately. As the bailiff led her out of the courtroom, Patricia turned and looked back at the gallery. Her eyes found mine for just a moment, and I saw something there that might have been regret or might have been hatred. Then she was gone, and it was over. The civil case settled 3 months later. Patricia's insurance company agreed to pay the HOA $70,000 to cover the misappropriated funds plus legal fees. It wasn't everything, but it was close enough that the board decided to accept, rather than continue fighting in court for years. I received my restitution payment about 6 months after sentencing. $3,200, paid by the Colorado Department of Corrections as part of Patricia's restitution order. I deposited the check and then donated the entire amount to a local charity that helped homeowners fight predatory HOA practices. It seemed fitting. Life in Meadowbrook Estates settled into a new normal. David Richardson proved to be an excellent board president, focused on transparency and community service rather than power and profit. The new snow removal contractor did good work at fair prices. Several homeowners who had been afraid to speak up during Patricia's tenure became more active in community affairs, attending board meetings and volunteering for committees. Marcus renewed his lease at the rental property, and we joked occasionally about the infamous snow plowing incident that had spiraled into a criminal case. He told me that several of his friends were interested in renting in the neighborhood now that the board had reformed, which was good for property values. My primary residence at 847 Pinecrest Drive remained blissfully free from HOA interference. I continued to clear my own snow with my trusty snowblower, and nobody tried to bill me for services I never requested. The security cameras stayed up, though after a year without incident, I stopped checking them obsessively. I ran into Robert Chen at the grocery store about a year after Patricia's sentencing. We chatted for a few minutes in the produce section, catching up on neighborhood news. "You know," Robert said, "your case was a wake-up call for a lot of HOAs in the area. Several of them have reached out asking for advice on implementing better oversight and preventing board misconduct. You might have accidentally started a small reform movement." That's good to hear. Nobody should have to deal with what Patricia put people through. Agreed. For what it's worth, I'm sorry I didn't catch what she was doing sooner. I was on the board the whole time, and I should have been paying more attention. You can't blame yourself. She was deliberately hiding what she was doing, and she had enough legitimate authority that people didn't question her. Still, I learned a valuable lesson about vigilance and accountability. We said our goodbyes, and I finished my shopping. Driving home, I reflected on how a simple fraudulent invoice had unraveled an entire scheme of corruption. If Patricia had just let it go after I refused to pay, she might have gotten away with everything. But her need to retaliate, to punish me for standing up to her, had been her downfall. Pride and arrogance had led her to make mistakes that exposed the full extent of her crimes. The rental property at 1243 Birchwood Lane continued to generate steady income, and I eventually bought a second rental property in a different neighborhood with no HOA at all. I had learned my lesson about the potential complications of HOA involvement, even as a landlord rather than a resident. The new property required more hands-on maintenance, but at least I knew exactly what I was paying for and didn't have to worry about someone trying to scam me. 2 years after Patricia's sentencing, I received a letter forwarded through the district attorney's office. It was from Patricia, writing from the Colorado Women's Correctional Facility. The letter was surprisingly brief and surprisingly genuine. "Mr. Vance," it read, "I have spent a lot of time in here thinking about the choices I made and the people I hurt. I want you to know that I am genuinely sorry for what I put you through. You were right to stand up to me, and you were right to fight back. I convinced myself that I was entitled to take advantage of my position because I worked hard and deserved the extra income. I was wrong. I hurt my community, I betrayed people's trust, and I destroyed my own life in the process. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I recognize what I did and I am working to become a better person. I hope you are doing well." The letter was signed with her full name in careful handwriting. I read it twice, trying to decide how I felt. Part of me was skeptical, wondering if this was just an attempt to look good for the parole board. But another part of me wanted to believe that people could change, that even someone who had caused so much harm could eventually understand their mistakes and genuinely regret them. I didn't respond to the letter. I wasn't ready to offer forgiveness, and I didn't think she was asking for it, not really. But I kept the letter in a file with all the other documents from the case, a strange capstone to a bizarre chapter of my life. Patricia was released on parole after serving 20 months of her 4-year sentence. I heard about it through Robert, who kept tabs on the case even after it was officially closed. According to what he learned, she moved to Wyoming to live with her sister and got a job doing bookkeeping for a small construction company. She was prohibited from serving on any HOA board or holding any position of fiduciary responsibility as part of her parole conditions. I never saw her again, which was fine with me. The story had ended, really ended, with her removal from the community and her punishment for her crimes. Anything beyond that was her own journey, one I had no part in and no interest in following. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA thrived under new leadership. David Richardson served 2 terms as president before stepping down to let someone else take over. The board remained transparent and accountable, publishing detailed financial reports every quarter and holding open forums where homeowners could ask questions and raise concerns. The neighborhood became a model for how an HOA should operate, focused on maintaining property values and quality of life rather than on power and control. I stayed in my house at 847 Pinecrest Drive, enjoying my exemption from HOA rules while benefiting from living in a well-maintained community. My rental property continued to be profitable, and Marcus eventually bought a house of his own in the neighborhood after getting married. I found a new tenant, a young professional woman named Sarah, who appreciated that I was a responsive landlord who didn't try to nickel and dime her. Sometimes, when I was out clearing snow from my driveway at 6 in the morning, I would think about that original invoice and how close Patricia had come to getting away with her scheme. If I had been less organized, less willing to fight back, less fortunate in having documentation and recordings, she might have successfully billed me and moved on to other victims. The $3,200 would have been painful but not devastating, and I might have paid it just to avoid the hassle. But I had fought back, and in doing so, I had exposed a pattern of corruption that had been bleeding the community for years. Dozens of homeowners had been victimized, and $65,000 had been stolen. By standing up for myself, I had inadvertently stood up for everyone else. There was something satisfying about that, about knowing that doing the right thing had mattered. Not in some abstract moral sense, but in concrete terms. Money had been recovered. A criminal had been punished. A community had been reformed. Those were real outcomes, tangible results that justified the stress and effort of fighting. I learned several lessons from the experience. I learned to document everything, to trust my instincts when something seemed wrong, and to not be intimidated by people in positions of authority who abused their power. I learned that standing up to bullies, even institutional bullies, was not only possible but necessary. And I learned that communities were only as good as the people who led them, and the vigilance of those who held leaders accountable. The security cameras stayed up, a permanent reminder to remain alert. The files from the case stayed organized in my home office, occasionally referenced when friends or colleagues asked about the experience. And the snowblower stayed in my garage, ready for the next winter, when I would once again clear my own driveway and be grateful that nobody was trying to bill me for services I never requested. Years passed. The memory of Patricia Hendricks faded from daily conversation in Meadowbrook Estates, becoming just another story about what happened before the new board took over. Younger residents who moved in after the scandal had ended would sometimes ask about it, having heard vague rumors or references, and older residents would share the tale as a cautionary story about the importance of HOA oversight. I eventually paid off the mortgage on my primary residence, a milestone that felt especially sweet given everything I had been through to protect it from Patricia's attempted lien. The rental property continued to appreciate in value, and I refinanced it at a lower rate, improving my monthly cash flow. Life moved on as it does. The drama and stress of fighting Patricia became just another chapter in my history, important but not defining. I was Nathan Vance, a homeowner and landlord in Boulder, Colorado, who had once stood up to a corrupt HOA president and won. That was part of my story, but it wasn't my whole story. But every time I received my monthly HOA fee statement for the rental property, I would check it carefully, verifying every charge and making sure everything was properly documented and authorized. I would never again assume that people in positions of authority were acting in good faith. Patricia had taught me that lesson the hard way, and it was one I would never forget. The snow fell each winter, blanketing Meadowbrook Estates in white, and the plows came through in their orderly fashion, clearing driveways and walkways for reasonable fees that were transparently accounted for in the HOA budget. And I stood in my own driveway with my snowblower, clearing my own snow, master of my own property, free from the schemes and scams of those who would abuse their power for personal gain. That freedom, that simple autonomy over my own home, was worth fighting for. Patricia had tried to take it from me with fraudulent invoices and threats and intimidation, and she had failed. The system had worked eventually, slowly, but it had worked. Justice had been served, restitution had been made, and the community had been reformed. In the end, that was enough. It had to be enough, because life wasn't about perfect victories or complete vindication. It was about standing up when it mattered, fighting when necessary, and then moving forward when the fight was done. I had done all of those things, and I had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more prepared for whatever challenges might come next. The invoice that started it all sat in my file cabinet, a yellowed piece of paper with an absurd number at the bottom. $3,200 for services never rendered, for snow removal on a property I was already paying to maintain. It was a monument to audacity and greed, and it was also a reminder that sometimes the most outrageous scams could be defeated by simple persistence and documentation. I closed the file cabinet and turned off the light in my office. Outside, the Colorado evening was settling in, the mountains visible in the distance, snow-capped and eternal. My house was warm and paid for. My rental property was occupied and profitable. My community was well-run and accountable. And Patricia Hendricks was a fading memory, a cautionary tale, a problem solved. Life was good, and I had fought to keep it that way. That was the real story, the one that mattered. Not the drama or the courtroom victories or the criminal sentencing, but the simple fact that I had protected what was mine and helped others in the process. That was enough. That was everything. And when the next snow fell, I would be ready, snowblower in hand, clearing my own driveway on my own terms, exactly as it should be.